Good afternoon, everyone. On behalf of Elaine's family, I would like to welcome you to this celebration of Elaine's life, and thank you for being here. Our gathering here this afternoon is an expression, a reflection of Elaine's wishes. As you know, Elaine was not one to just let life come across her plate haphazardly and deal with whatever life threw at her. She was a planner and an organizer, and she thought things out well in advance. And when it came to the end of her life, it was no different. As she thought about the end of her life, as she visited with family and friends and myself about that time, she envisioned a gathering of her family, her friends, her political colleagues to celebrate her life. And that's what brings us here this afternoon, is to celebrate her life. Following our dismissal in a short while, this celebration of Elaine's life will continue at her home and garden that she loved so much. And as you have seen in the program, I'm sure you are all invited. Her family would like to invite you to please join them at her home, her garden, and to continue this celebration of life after our dismissal here this afternoon. Well, today we have gathered to celebrate the life of Elaine Baxter. Her life was a 20th century story, an American story, if you will. It was framed on the one end at the beginning of her life It was at the beginning of her life. She was born in 1933 in Chicago, and at the beginning of her life was the inauguration of Franklin Delano Roosevelt as the 32nd President of the United States. And in a short while, we're going to hear some words from his inaugural address in that year. And on the other end of her life, it was framed by the election of the first woman as Vice President of the United States of America. And that was a very, very important thing to Elaine in her life. She was born in Chicago in 1933 to Irish immigrant parents who certainly knew the meaning of hard work and challenges and difficult times. Her father struggled to find work during the Great Depression and even be able to provide for his family. She grew up in the large cities of Chicago and Washington, D.C., and she was the first woman in her family to go to college. She attended the University of Illinois, and it was there that she met a handsome and a dashing young man by the name of Harry Baxter. They struck up a friendship, which ultimately led to their marriage in 1954, and one of their shared interests was politics. It continued to be a strong bond between them over all the years of their journey through life together. Harry was a wonderful partner for Elaine, and he was her biggest supporter and her most loyal constituent. He was totally supportive of her running for office and serving in various capacities of government over the years. She always told women, she said, if you want to go into politics, marry a man who thinks that's what women do. And for Harry, that was the norm, because he had grown up with a mom who was very involved in political volunteering over the year. It strikes me that it takes a strong man, one who has his ego well in check, to be able to take a step back, to see his wife succeed and be in the spotlight, and to not feel insecure or threatened by that in any way. And that was certainly Harry. They were a team, life partners, and they reveled in each other's successes. Over the years that I was privileged to visit with Elaine and Harry, whether it was at a social gathering or more recently, the last few years, in the hospital, as their health began to decline, each of them at various times, the one thing that struck me was that they were always together. They were a team, life partners, soulmates, until the end. After they were married in 1954, they lived in San Francisco for a couple of years before moving to Burlington. Of course, that's where Harry's roots were, and he wanted to come back home to Burlington and to work with his dad. Well, that wasn't really Elaine's dream to live in a small town, because after all, she was a big city girl, having grown up in Chicago and Washington, D.C. But she and Harry were a team, and they supported each other's dreams, goals, and ambitions, and so to Burlington they came. Once here, she became active in local and state politics along with many other community activities. And of course, it goes without saying that Elaine really embraced Burlington. She absorbed the history of the town, its families, and its houses, mostly from Harry's mother, and she loved telling their stories, and she knew them as well as anyone. As you know, she was very invested in her community, and she really cared about Burlington and its residents. She always felt that she needed to pass the history of the North Hill and its families along to the current residents of North Hill so that that history would not be forgotten. In a few minutes, Brian Schulte is going to share a few remembrances of Elaine and some words about how important that history was to her. Suffice it to say, she had a strong sense of place and a commitment to her neighbors and her community that very few have. Elaine's life truly was remarkable. Her lifetime encompassed wars, the struggle for equal rights for women, the civil rights movement. She saw tremendous social upheaval in our country at various times. She saw our country move from an agricultural society to a technological one, from the flying of the first jet plane in 1939 to the flying of a helicopter on Mars. Elaine's dedication to public service, working to build a strong government and enriching communities, was a constant in her life over all the years. As much as she was involved in politics, to say that she was a politician, I don't believe truly does her justice. Because first and foremost, she was a people person. She was a public servant. She knew that when government works for the common good, it enables people to put down roots, to build strong families and strengthen their communities. I believe that the greatest tribute that we could give to Elaine and the best way that we could honor her life would be for each one of us to take up the values and her compassion that she lived and to truly live them on a daily basis, just as she did. Over the years, Elaine was privileged to work with many local and state politicians who became her colleagues and her friends. And we're privileged to have some of them here in person today and some by video. But at this time, it's my honor to introduce to you the Secretary of Agriculture, Tom Vilsack, who is going to share some of his remembrances of Elaine with us on video.
Thank you for letting me join you today to memorialize our friend Elaine Baxter. When I think of Elaine, I think of that infectious smile, that boundless energy, that burning competitive and courageous spirit, and a strong desire to serve. Now, I'm sure there will be people who will be family members today and friends and colleagues, community leaders who will talk about Elaine and her contributions to their lives. But I'd like to talk from a perspective as a mentee. Elaine ran for Congress at the same time I was running for the state Senate. I was new to this political game. She was not, having won a statewide race. I respected her, and I listened to her. Her advice in that 1992 campaign was, you need to be everywhere. You need to be everywhere all the time. Well, I thought to myself, well, that's easy for her to say. Now, she's got boundless energy. But I listened to that advice, and I knocked thousands of doors in Keokuk, Donaldson, Mount Pleasant, Washington, and it made a difference. And I was fortunately successful to have been elected to the state Senate. And I knew at that point in time that I had a friend and a mentor in Southeast Iowa. I needed that friend and mentor in 1998 when I decided to run for governor. As many of you remember, I had a tough primary. Elaine gave me good advice. She said, build from your base. Make sure you don't forget Southeast Iowa. Well, it turned out to be pretty good advice because I lost the entire state of Iowa with the exception of my Senate district, Southeast Iowa. But I won the Senate district by such a large margin in that primary that I was fortunate to be the Democratic nominee in 1998. As you all know, I ran against Jim Ross Lightfoot, the same person that had Elaine had run against. And so she gave me good advice in terms of working hard against Mr. Lightfoot. There were periods of time during that campaign, as many of you might remember, where I was pretty far behind and oftentimes discouraged. And oftentimes, when I was most discouraged, I'd happen to be in Southeast Iowa at an event that Elaine showed up at. She had pretty good advice. She said, "Buck it up, Buster. You're in a competitive race. You got a chance. Don't give up." I didn't, and I had the fortunate opportunity to serve as governor 1999 to 2007. And during that period of time, I had the opportunity to ensure that Elaine had more service to give to the state by selecting her for the Humanities Board and ultimately for the Lottery Board. Because of that mentor relationship, I learned at a very early age the importance of listening to women. When I went to the Senate, I listened to Elaine Simoniak, who was another mentor. When I became governor, I had a great partner in Sally Peterson, who taught me a lot about people with disabilities. And then when I became Secretary of Agriculture, I had the fortune to have some great deputies who gave me advice about how to work in Washington and how to expand the reach and scope of agriculture in the U.S. So when I think of Elaine, I think of someone who provided me just great counsel, but a tremendous example that allowed me to have more success than I probably deserve in this business. You know, one of my favorite quotes is a Teddy Roosevelt quote. It's called "The Man in the Arena," but it really should be called "The Person in the Arena," especially when you're talking about people like Elaine Baxter. In that quote, Teddy Roosevelt talks about the person in the arena who fights valiantly, who sometimes errs and comes up short, but knows the great enthusiasm of high achievement, so that they will never be with those cold and timid souls who know neither victory nor defeat. Elaine Baxter knew both victory and defeat. She learned from both victory and defeat. She never stopped serving. She never stopped caring. She was one of a kind. We will miss her, and it is now our responsibility to approach our work in service with boundless energy, with a competitive and courageous spirit, and a continued desire to make a difference. Thank you very much. Thank you for letting me join you today to memorialize.
Hi, my name is Karen Baxter Varnhagen, Elaine's niece. The first quote is from FDR. Our grandparents were avid supporters. It is from FDR's March 1933 speech, his inaugural address. Elaine was 6 weeks old. FDR died in office when Elaine was 12 and her family had moved to Washington, D.C. She remembered his funeral procession when he was going by. If I read the temper of our people correctly, we now realize, as we have never realized before, our interdependence on each other, that we cannot merely take, but we must give as well. That if we are to go forward, we must be willing to sacrifice for the good of a common discipline. Because without such discipline, no progress is made. We are, I know, ready and willing to submit our lives and property to such discipline, because it makes possible a leadership which aims at a larger good.
Good afternoon. My name is Terry Abras. I've been a friend of the Baxter family for several decades. 3 years ago, I was very honored when Elaine asked me to help compile an oral history of her life. My reading will be from John F. Kennedy's inaugural address, January 20th, 1961, which was 4 days after Elaine's 28th birthday. Elaine was greatly inspired by the Kennedys and their youth and their commitment to public service. especially Jacqueline Kennedy's appreciation for history, historical buildings, and her restoration of the White House. Elaine and Harry named their third child John after President John F. Kennedy. We dare not forget that we are heirs to that first revolution. Let the word go forth from this time and place to friend and foe alike that the torch has been passed to a new generation of Americans, born in this century, tempered by war, disciplined by a hard and bitter peace, proud of our ancient heritage, and unwilling to witness or permit the slow undoing of those human rights to which this nation has always been committed, and to which we are committed today at home and around the world.
Good afternoon. My name is Art Anderson. I have the good fortune of being married to Kate Baxter. And so we're pleased that our two sons here, one of which is John, named after John, named after JFK. My quote comes from President Jimmy Carter. Harry and Elaine attended their inauguration, and frankly, I think we're two of the earliest supporters of his candidacy. The American dream endures. We must once again have full faith in our country and in one another. I believe America can be better, for we know that if we despise our own government, we have no future. Our government must at the same time be both competent and compassionate. We have already found a high degree of personal liberty, and we are now struggling to enhance equality of opportunity. Our commitment to human rights must be absolute, our laws fair, our natural beauty preserved. The powerful must not persecute the weak, and human dignity must be enhanced.
My name is Nancy Schulte. I'm a longtime friend and political colleague of Elaine. And I must say, I loved what Ag Secretary Tom Vilsack said about women and how he was mentored by women. And we all know that Elaine was so interested in women's issues and women as political candidates. And I'm so glad she got to see the first woman in the White House. And I think it's fitting that I share with you a quote from Vice President Kamala Harris. This was given on Inauguration Night in January of 21. And this is the quote from our first woman in the White House. Even in darkness, we not only dream, we do. We not only see what has been, we see what can be. We shoot for the moon, and we plant our flag on it. We are bold, fearless, and ambitious. We are undaunted in our belief that we shall overcome, that we will rise up. This is American aspiration. In the middle of the Civil War, Abraham Lincoln saw a better future, and he built it with land-grant colleges and the Transcontinental Railroad. Dr. King fought for racial and economic justice. Throughout history, American aspiration is what drove the women of our nation to demand equal rights, and the authors of the Bill of Rights to claim freedoms that had rarely been written down before. So glad Elaine was here to see Kamala. Thank you. To say this, I've introduced Senator Harkin before in 1984, but it's been a long time. We will now have a video remembrance from Senator Tom Harkin.
Hello to all my friends who are gathered in Burlington today. I'm sorry that I can't be with you in person, but of course I am with you in spirit, and that is the spirit of Elaine Baxter. And that means a spirit of liberal philosophy, a commitment to public service, and of course, support for the Democratic Party. I first of all want to thank her daughter Kate for helping to arrange this and to permit me to at least make a video to be recorded since I cannot be there in person. I first met Elaine back in 1974. I was running for Congress out in western Iowa, and we had met at a Democratic Party function. I think she was in local office at that time, but very interested in my race, and well, I think she felt sorry for me because I was running in a hopeless district, and nobody thought I was ever going to win. But I happened to time it right. I ran in the Watergate year, and of course I became part of that great Watergate class of 1974 or 75. But that's when I met her and Harry, and thus ensued a long friendship. I next got to know Elaine. She was in Washington. She came in during the Carter administration, and she was the representative for HUD, the Department of Housing and Urban Development, but she was the congressional liaison person. So I saw her a lot on Capitol Hill. In fact, more than once, many times we had lunch together in the House dining room. I was a member of the House of Representatives during that time. In fact, I think one time, I remember she was lobbying me on some HUD bill that I was not too enamored of. I represented a very rural district in western Iowa, and I wasn't all that committed to perhaps something that was happening in urban development. But Elaine came to see me and said they needed my vote. I can't even remember how I voted, but since we continued our friendship, I think I probably gave in and did what she wanted me to do. So I know, and then she came back after Carter lost, and ran for the Iowa House. I remember that, and she was in the House. But I remember most of her service as Secretary of State because she came in there when I went to the U.S. Senate. But during all this time, we kept up a line of communications. No Zoom, no emails or anything like that. Seems like ancient history. But phone calls and meetings, usually in conjunction with some Democratic Party event or a campaign. It seems like we were always together on campaigns, either for ourselves or for someone else. One of my biggest disappointments was in 1994 when Elaine ran for Congress, and I thought she was going to win. I remember flying around with her, doing campaign stops, and we were just, the polls were great. It looked like everything was going our way, her way. But it was not to be. That was the 1994 Republican landslide, and Elaine did not make it. She would have been a wonderful member of the House of Representatives. Would have been just tremendous at it. And so, after that, years rolled on, but Elaine and Harry, it's almost hard to talk about Elaine without Harry because they were always together, at least in my sector in politics. They were just always together. And on campaigns, supporting candidates, supporting a progressive Democratic Party. So that's what I remember most. I must say that in all my travels with Elaine and during our time together in Washington, back when I was in the House, we had ongoing conversations that, as I said, went on for almost 40 years. And there were conversations that were about two things, either family or government policy. She was devoted to her family. Of course, she and Harry had this great love affair for 58 years. Ruth and I are catching up. But family aside, she was so committed to government and good government, honest, clean, responsive, representative government, and making sure government could work for people. Her attitude about government is what is sorely needed today at every level. And that is a commitment to public service, the public good, the commonweal, her devotion to the good things about government, about human rights and social justice and economic justice and making sure that laws are fair and that people at the bottom have a ladder of opportunity available to them. Again, for me, Elaine represented the best of both what it means to be a sound person committed to family and community, which she was to Burlington for all these years, but also what it means to be a citizen, making sure you devote a good deal of your life to making sure that our democracy can work. And believe me, we need that now, also, more than ever. There are warning flags all over about what's happening to our democracy in America. And that's why I say to you, we are here in the spirit of Elaine Baxter. The spirit of devotion to our country and to make sure that our democracy continues to grow and develop, continues to be representative of all the people and not any narrow ideological sector of our society. So again, I wish I could be there to commiserate with all of you, but it has given me at least an opportunity to remember one of my favorite persons that I enjoyed working with and knowing during all of my adult life, really, almost 40 years. So again, I'm sad about the passing of Elaine, but I'm happy for her life because she did good things and was, again, as I say, an outstanding citizen. So thank you all, and let's commit ourselves to the kind of public service that marked Elaine Baxter's entire life there.
Good afternoon, Elaine Baxter. The words that came to me just now is service as a privilege, and she set that example. My name's Jeff Heeland. I'm here because 94, when Elaine ran for Congress, I was mayor in Burlington, and I was a great fan of hers. And she, I think of me, that I really didn't know that I'd been mentored by one of the finest ladies that I've ever known in politics and in good governance. I learned about good governance from Elaine and from the folks that I always talk about. We stand on their shoulders, and we find ourselves here today. So in this remembrance of Elaine and celebration of her life, I can't imagine someone who would have given more to her country, as President Kennedy asked us to ask not. Elaine was that example, and I was in kindergarten when President Kennedy was assassinated, so it's always had a big impact on me, that Americans will all be better if they were like President Kennedy, like Elaine. Thank you very much to her family for all the sacrifices I know you had in supporting Elaine through all those years and things that she did, great things for our country. Tom?
Thanks, Jeff. My name's Tom Courtney. I think I first met Elaine Baxter in about 1976. I just got out of the service, and the first Jimmy Carter run, I think, was when it was. And I got to know her then, and I got to know her later in her race for the Iowa House, and then later for Secretary of State. And later on, when I was in the Iowa Senate, I recruited for my caucus, for the Democratic caucus, and I would always try to recruit women just as hard as I recruited men. And I was at an event one night, and I saw Elaine there. She said, how's that recruiting going? And I said, well, it's okay, but I talk to men and I talk to women, and I'd really like to get a better representation of women in the Iowa legislature. And I said that one thing with women, when I recruit women, women always say, I can't do the job. She said, I bet men don't say that, do they? I said, no, men never say that. Men always say they can be able to handle it. So we through the years, she mentored me sometimes when she thought I was doing something wrong. She'd tell me I was doing something wrong. And I just loved Elaine. She was, in her later years, when she couldn't get around as well, I was the chair of the local party, and I would go pick her up before events and take her to events, and a lot of times take her home, and that was always kind of fun. She never was out of something to talk about. It seemed like she always had something to talk about. But I'm up here actually also to tell you about a friend of mine, Eric Baker. Eric Baker was the chief of staff for the majority leader in the Iowa Senate. He's now the chief of staff for the minority leader. And I didn't realize until after Elaine passed that Eric had worked for her for a number of years. And so he sent a little note, and I'd just like to read it to you if I could. In 1994, Elaine Baxter hired me to work in the Iowa Secretary of State's office. One of my many duties was to drive her to official office events, as well as campaign events, since she was running for Congress that year in the old sprawling 3rd Senate District. Cell phones were just becoming prevalent at the time, but they were rather expensive, and the ever-frugal Elaine only used it when necessary, which created plenty of time for us to talk and converse about things great and small. I learned a lot on these trips, and one of the things she said has just never left me. She said, the hardest vote for a woman to get is another woman's. As a younger staffer, this was hard to fathom, but she gently explained to me that the stereotypes that existed at the time, and many still do today, that other women didn't see it as a woman's role to run for office or hold elected positions that traditionally had always gone to males. She also pointed out that politics is a rough and tumble world, and when a woman fought hard for her positions, the woman would be labeled as pushy and aggressive, while a man doing the same thing was viewed as tough and confident, all making the voters more turned off. Many of her points were spot on. We saw much of what she said play out in the 2016 presidential election. I miss my drives and conversations with Elaine, excuse me, but will always hold dear what she taught me and how she made me view the world as just a little bit differently and hopefully for the better. Godspeed, Elaine. Rest in peace with Harry. One of the things she told me, I asked her about that too, and I said, how'd you get Secretary of State? And she said, it was okay. Since I was running for a secretary, women said, well, that's something another woman should be doing. She said, I think that's how I got it. And I just want to give you a guy named Ben Nelson was my staffer this year. He's in New York City working on a race in New York, but he wanted me to just say, he sent me a whole big piece, but I told him I wouldn't read all that, but he said he works now in Democratic politics because of Elaine. So I thought that was kind of neat. I always do this. Nancy always laughs at me when I do this. But anyway, one other thing before my introduction, I want to thank Kate, Harry, and John. I want to thank you guys. You all have done a great job setting this up. This is a great memorial to your mother's life. I know Kate especially just worked her tail off on this thing. I got 1 million emails and 1 million phone calls and messages from Kate. I know how hard she worked on this. And I want to thank you guys. I really appreciate what you did, and I know Elaine would be very proud of you. So thank you so much. Finally, it's my pleasure to make this introduction today. I first met Chet Culver when he was Secretary of State. He didn't follow immediately after Elaine, but a few years later. And I then worked with him when he was elected governor of the state of Iowa. Chet brought a lot to the job and served Iowans well, both as Secretary of State and as governor. Elaine and Chet knew each other well, and it's my honor to introduce you today to Governor Chet Culver.
thank you very much, Tom. And it's been a while. I've been out of politics for a long time, and a couple years ago I was on a flight back from D.C. to Des Moines, and the gentleman next to me said, "Didn't you used to be Chet Culver?" I said, "Yeah, I'm still Culver, Chet Culver. I just don't have the title anymore." So it is great to be here with all of you and Kate and the family. Thank you very much for inviting all of us and for organizing this wonderful tribute to your mother. I unfortunately went through this a few years ago with losing my dad, so I know how meaningful this is to all of the family and friends that can be a part of this kind of celebration. I'm wearing two hats today. I'm going to give a few personal comments, and then I'm going to be reading a letter from one of Marilyn Monroe, one of Elaine's best friends, Marilyn Monroe. And I'll just start with following up on a lot of the things that Secretary Vilsack and Senator Harkin said about Elaine. Number one, she was a real trailblazer. I mean, the first woman ever elected to the city council in the history of Burlington, Iowa. That's, a lot of people would just stop there. And just kind of shows you the kind of fighter that she was. She's like, I can get elected. I've got something to offer. I have a vision and a plan for this community, and I'm going to stand up and serve. And she did that. And then she went on to become, after her tenure in the legislature, just the third woman in Iowa history to be elected Secretary of State. So whatever she did, she wanted to not only do it well, but she wasn't afraid of taking on challenges when other people weren't successful or wouldn't even have the courage to try. Number two, she was a dedicated public servant. She wasn't only interested in winning the election. She wanted to serve the people. And she was very passionate about government and issues and public policy, and she was a champion for women's rights and workers' rights and voter rights. And frankly, that's not always the case in politics. Some people just run to win, and then they're more interested in the next election. They're not, that tough part of governing and rolling up your sleeves and getting things done, that's the hard part. But Elaine had an incredible track record, whether it was here at the city council or in the Iowa legislature or as Secretary of State, and even during her tour in Washington, D.C. at the Department of Housing and Urban Development. She had a record everywhere that she went, in every opportunity that she had to serve. And a lot of that legacy, those policies that she worked on, continue today because of her. And then the third real attribute or quality that I'm reminded of when I think of my friend Elaine Baxter is she was a great role model, a mentor. I mean, she sat down with me for hours when I drove over here to express my interest in running for Secretary of State. She gave to this community, she gave to our state, she gave to our country when she worked in the Carter administration, and then she kept giving until the end of her life. I mean, who would venture to guess how many events Elaine and Harry hosted at their home? It's well over 100. I mean, it's got to be hundreds. She probably had a half dozen for me in my 12 years. And not even a question. Elaine, she'd say yes before you even asked what it was for. And then she did the same thing in terms of charity and raising money for Parkinson's. And just till the end of her life, she kept wanting to help and to serve. And she was very generous with her time and her resources, along with her partner, Harry. So I think those are the three things that I wanted to focus on. And what I ask all of you to do is to use that as an example. Let's carry the torch forward because of Elaine, because of Harry, and their commitment to our state and to our country. We can host more events, for example, whether it's in politics or charity. We can all do more. And let's try to live up to that example that Elaine set. Now I will read a letter from Marilyn Monroe. Many of you know Marilyn. Trust me, she really wanted to be here today. She's retired now, living in Florida, and her health would not allow her to fly up here for this. And I think that really broke her heart because she did want to be here. So I'm going to read a letter from Marilyn, and it gives you a little history of their relationship. Elaine and I came from two different sides of the tracks. She was a member of a country club, and I was a member of the United Auto Workers. Most people would not have expected us to become dear friends. Early on, since the city council races were nonpartisan, I did not play a big part in her campaigns. However, I kept urging her to step up and run for a Democratic office. We first worked together in the 1980 presidential campaign. Harry and Elaine were very involved in Jimmy Carter's campaign locally, while I was working with the United Auto Workers to organize the county for Carter. After the Carter victory and Elaine's tour in Washington, D.C., we got back together again when she came home. I offered to help organize labor on her successful campaign for the Iowa House. During her tenure in the Iowa legislature, we remained very close and personal friends, and I would often brief her and encourage her to support important union legislation. In 1986, I strongly urged Elaine to run for Secretary of State. It was an open seat because the long-term incumbent was retiring. So I knew, based on her ability to govern and prior electoral success, she had a real opportunity to win. At first, Elaine was reluctant to run statewide, but after consulting at length with Harry and a few others, we were ready to take on this challenge. It was a tough race, but with the help of our talented staff, we won. It was a great victory. The campaign was very strenuous, but Elaine never complained about being tired. She was a real trooper, always ready to go from morning to night. Her re-election campaign for Secretary of State in 1990 was the same. She was a real winner. In addition, Elaine was an excellent organizer, planner, and teacher, and together we made a really good team. She taught me the ins and outs of good public policy, and I taught her about grassroots politics and the nuts and bolts of a well-run campaign. As a result of this partnership, we became very close over the years, and we were just like sisters. We not only respected each other, but we loved each other too. I know today she is in a good place, no doubt, and she's continuing to use her gifts to organize, to teach, and to inspire others. So until we meet again, may God bless you, Elaine Baxter. Thank you very much.
Hello, everyone. My name is Brian Schulte, and I'm proud to be a member of Elaine's Circle of Friends. Kate requested that I present some words of remembrance about Elaine, and in preparing for this ceremony, it was was the first time I'd ever given my relationship with her any considered thought. After doing so, my immediate conclusion was, what a clever friend Elaine was. She would introduce you to her passions. She would press you to participate. And very soon you were hooked. This was especially true for me in regard to her love for politics and historic preservation. Let me briefly describe how she did this. Number one, politics. Nancy Schulte and I first became friends shortly after graduating from college in 1968, when Elaine decided that we must be on the Des Moines County's committee for the election of John Schmidhauser to the United States Congress. Thereafter, she never quit. She drafted me to work on the Democratic committees for the election of Edward Mezvinsky and for Elaine Baxter for Congress. This and all the other things that have already been mentioned was a result of my early direct involvement in these Democratic Party activities, while sitting at the feet of Elaine when she passionately, and I mean passionately, discussed political issues. I became a dedicated progressive Democrat. Historic preservation. Political persuasion wasn't all Elaine used our time together for. She also, at every opportunity, used it to discuss her passion for historic preservation. Elaine was especially dedicated to the restoration and preservation of her home on North Hill and other historic structures in Burlington, especially the old library building and the Port of Burlington building. She was one of the founding members of the Burlington Heritage Trust and was one of its early presidents. Her efforts there helped transform the trust into the viable organization that it is today. The Heritage Trust is the brainchild of Bob McCannon. It is dedicated to the mission of encouraging the preservation and restoration of historic Burlington architecture. Elaine, in those early days, encouraged me, insisted, to also become involved as a board member, and of course, it's a position I still hold today. Because of our mutual political and Heritage Trust involvement, I found myself to be frequently in Elaine's home. When business was done, the conversation would always turn to the things that she had been doing in her ongoing effort for the preservation for that property. At Elaine's direction, all was done with meticulous, and I mean meticulous, detail. This included an English garden to which you've been invited to today. It was designed by Elaine, but only after observing such gardens in Charleston, South Carolina, and get this, and enrolling and attending in design seminars held in England, so she could get it just right. Jane and I were so impressed with her work that when we completed our restoration work, we had to invite her and Harry to our home for an inspection. It wasn't so much about an inspection, but I just wanted her to know how much we copied her ideas for such things as bathroom cabinets. Elaine, in connection with her battle with Parkinson's disease, also converted one of two parlors in their beautiful home into a bedroom, and enlarging the first floor bathroom in the process. This apparently required a larger medicine cabinet. She spent more than a period of 3 weeks at the Heritage Trust Preservation Station, inspecting all cabinets in our inventory to find a cabinet meeting her standards. She never did find one there. Because of Elaine's example as a preservationist, I also credit her for my attempt to be the same. But I will never be her equal. Neither will many people match her attributes for being energetic, meticulous, and determined. She loved her family. She loved her community. She loved her country. And so, Madam Secretary, she liked it when I called her that. And so, Madam Secretary, it's time to say goodbye. Thank you for being my friend and my mentor. Your battle with Parkinson's is over. There are no more political battles for you to fight. And there are probably no buildings in heaven that need restoration. May you rest in peace.
Hello there. It's so nice to see so many friends and family here for Elaine. I have kind of a funny role. I'm the neighbor kid. We moved to 1017 back in 1979, and after the first salvo of bottle rockets up the driveway, we became very fast friends with John, and that has persisted through many decades. The thing I remember about Elaine was that when we were kids growing up, she was away doing fancy things. And I was a dumb kid, and I didn't really know what that was, but I knew it was fancy. And she wasn't necessarily there, but her presence was always there. And I was there a lot, so, I was always hanging out, listening to albums with John, and Harry was usually around, and it was good. And then we got older and moved away and went to college and got married, and every time coming home, well, I got to go over to the Baxters and say hello, got to say hi to Harry and Elaine. John wasn't there, Kate and Harry had long since departed, but we, all the time, it was just a standard, got to go say hello to Harry and Elaine. And when I had my children, I would come down, I was in Iowa City, and I'd bring them down to see Mom and Dad, and of course had to go say hi, and Elaine always wanted to see the babies, and it was just a constant. And as soon as they got old enough to weed her garden, they were weeding her garden. and it was just very nice to have this really long relationship with her, and many of you have spoken all these words. She was a role model, and I think it was far too easy for me to take for granted how impressive she was, and because she was just always there. And I think that's my shortcoming, shame on me, but I really did enjoy all the times that I got to spend with Elaine. And, especially at the end, she really was energetic, and her Parkinson's really didn't slow her down. I was really impressed with her. I don't want to say Energizer Bunny, but there was a lot of that if I had her energy, hopefully I get to be her age, I hope that I can carry on in style like she always did.
everybody doing? I'd just like to make a program note. This is a part of the proceedings. We'll be switching from Elaine to Mom. So it's like a seismic shift. You might want to get comfy, take a breath. It's going to be okay. First of all, I'm John Baxter, the baby of the family. My sister Kate, Harry. We're Elaine and Harry's children. And if I can speak for them, I'd just like to thank everyone for coming out today, showing up, representing. I'd like to thank all the wonderful speakers we had today, and Secretary Vilsack, Senator Harkin, and Governor Culver. And I'd also, of course, like to thank the citizens of our hometown, Burlington, Iowa, because so many of you had a part in either working for Elaine or helping her or getting her to where she was, and hopefully she gave that back to you. And you all were a huge part of that. There's no question about that. And finally, I'd like to thank Harry, our father, because he did he did the same and supported her through thick and thin. And, you know, he definitely has to get props for that. Now, throughout this, the theme that you've heard a lot today was that she was a first and trailblazer, and that she broke through barriers and all that. Now, as her son, for me, these firsts were my first visit to the library. Mom. Who was the first person to take me to a concert? Mom. Who was the first person to take me cross-country skiing? Mom. Who was the first person to take me to the Rocky Horror Picture Show? Mom. Now, she was one and done with Rocky Horror. She didn't make it the Saturday nights, everything, and, you know, show up with newspaper and squirt guns, but she was there for the first one. And who was the first person to take me to an arty French film with subtitles? Mom. Who was the first person to turn me onto a croissant? Mom. And through all these things, she wasn't accompanying me, or she wasn't a chaperone. She was participating full on, and it was like, hey, let's go check this out. Let's see what this is about. And that sort of further continued on with through her work, and that she would sort of take things that I was interested in, my hobbies, my passions, and she would sort of parlay these things into her work. And a couple of examples of that would be, she was on the commission for the Great River Road, which are the highways that run adjacent to the Mississippi River. And through my cycling, she always, on the committee that she says, hey, these roads are the bread and butter of cyclists, and, you know, we need to really incorporate their needs and, you know, give them wide lanes and all these sorts of things. And another example I'll give is that she was attending a Rock the Vote meeting, I guess it would be, in Iowa City in 1990. And this meeting was comprised of college students and people in their early 20s and Mom. And so they're, you know, bouncing ideas off of each another. And she said, hey, what you really need to do is get someone who's going to speak to these youth and who's politically active with their communities. You know, somebody like KRS-One of Boogie Down Productions. Needless to say, the students and 20-somethings just sat there, mouths agape. Like, how does she know about KRS? You know, it's just like, that was Mom, full on. Now, she had some traits I'd like to mention, and the first trait is one that's so evident here today, and that was the love she had for my friends. Now, you can just take an informal head count. It's not even a contest. My friends are repping the hardest here today, folks. It's not, you know, much love to everyone else, but the room's tilted severely in our favor. She loved you guys big time, and she loved conversing with you, and not just like, oh, hi, Bobby, how are you today? She wanted to pick your brain. She wanted to know what was up in your life, what your passions were, what drove you, and what you were thinking about. And from me personally, I'd like to thank all of you, my friends, because if there's one defining thing that Mom gave me, and that was freedom. Lots of freedom. So you, my friends, and your families and parents filled in a lot of these sort of gaps, and whether it be rides to school or such and such, or a place to hang out after school, or a box of cookies to ravage through, or a few life lessons here and there. You provided all those things, and I thank you guys so much for doing that. And furthering that thought, and furthering all the thoughts you heard from the other speakers today about the dedication she had to her work, you might be thinking, now, did she have time for her kids? And I've had this not so subtly said to my face many times, and let me just end it all once and for all of her dedication to her family. Her Wi-Fi password is mother of 3. So, let's just end it right there. That says it all. Another of Mom's traits was that she would talk to anyone and everyone and engage them in conversation. Just people on the street, the most randoms. And, that's how she was. She just wanted to know what people were doing, what they're thinking, and what they're all about. And the third trait I'd like to point out was her love of her house, 1016 North 4th Street, which I hope you will all be joining us later on. She put in, I think, Brian, you said that she renovated the house. She renovated the house about 3 times over the course of my lifetime. And it was just a never-ending thing, sort of, whether it was rearranging a pillow in a particular place. The show never ended as far as her dedication to the house. And one of the most bizarre, or I don't know how even to put this, mythical, I just don't even know the words, but at her final day at the hospice, it was a Friday afternoon and then into the evening, and she passed away sometime around, 9:15 on Friday night. And we sat there, played a little music, told a few stories, had a few laughs, etc., and then gathered up our stuff and took it to the car, because we'd been camped out there for a couple days, loaded up the car. Harry gets in, Kate gets in, I get behind the wheel, turn on the ignition, and the digital screen where the clock is, 10:16 was the number, which that's pretty hardcore. I was expecting a bolt of lightning right then to come out of the sky. I think the best summary of her vibe, just her general je ne sais quoi, if you will, was last September of 2020. Now, as you all know, 2020 was sort of a different year for us all with, COVID and the pandemic and everything. And so I had a lot of time off. And so I came out to be with her and hang out. And I brought my bicycle out, and I spent, I think, 7 weeks here in August and September. So it was beautiful weather, just every day, blue sky, low humidity, perfect. And this is a time, because of the pandemic, that the airlines were actually, for once, looking after their customers' needs. And at any time, you could cancel your flight without a penalty, and have the full fare still waiting for you for your next booking. And so I was kind of I was looking at the weather forecast. It was another resplendent week in store, and I was kind of debating, God, should I stick around another week for this? And right up to the night of the flight, the night before the flight, and I was debating and kicking around my head, and we were sitting around the dinner table, and so I brought it up to her, and I said, I'm juggling this idea here of staying another week. I'm just, should I not? And she just looked up from her plate and very matter-of-factly said, I'd say go for it. And that was her, and that was Mom, and I love her for that and so much more.
All right, thanks. I guess I'm next. We're going from youngest to oldest. Great speakers, as everyone's been saying, and actually when Brian Schulte was up here, it reminded me of something. As you all know, a handful of years ago, my father passed away, and we had a wonderful funeral service for him. Brian was one of the pallbearers. He's been a lifetime friend of the family's, and we went to Aspen Grove, and then, as we are today, we went back to the family house, had a wonderful reception. Brian was one of the last people to leave. I walked him out, and as we got on the front porch of the family, Brian said to me, he said, Harry, I don't mean to say this in an insensitive manner, and I don't want this to come across the wrong way, but I had a great time today. Your father would have loved it. So looking at all of you today, I think the same thing. I think my mom would have loved it. Everyone being here in the ceremony that we've put on for her today. And I do want to give a special thanks to Kate, because she really did spearhead all this and put in the extra over-the-top attention to detail, emails that John and I were getting, you know, this long to say something that could have been said in one sentence. But it was great, and she did the same in really being the leader as far as mom's care the last year or two, working with the insurance companies and the caregivers. She really did a great job. Thanks, Kate. As we know, my mom was the Secretary of State in the mid-'80s when she was elected, and as we all know, the Secretary of State is in charge of elections, and I just wanted to tell you a few other things that the Secretary of State does, because I didn't know this until my mom was Secretary of State, that the Secretary of State is also in charge of corporations, notaries, patents, trademarks, charities and nonprofits, and the Highway Patrol for the state of Iowa. My mom had a staff of 77 people working for her, and she did a great job overseeing them all. And when she was reelected, she had support from both sides of the aisle, and she was reelected by a wide margin. And as you know, she was born and grew up in Chicago for her early years before going to DC. And to her parents, her mom was an Irish immigrant and father Irish also, and he was really the figure in her life that was most powerful, and he was a very strong-willed, independent, adventurous person, and sometimes drank a bit too much and sometimes gambled a bit too much, but he was great. We all loved him. And when she was very young, he took her in Chicago and had her go from one place to another on her own as a 5-year-old, riding the public transportation in the city of Chicago, by train, by bus, by whatever means, to get from one place to another, as a 5-year-old girl in the city of Chicago. And of course her mother was completely against this, and her father said, well, she's got to grow up sometime. And he thought a few years later, a good father-daughter outing was a trip to the track, and she needed to learn how to read a racing form. And he taught her to drive at a very young age. She was driving as a 12-year-old, and he was teaching her you had to be right on the person's bumper right in front of her. It really had to be a hard charging. You couldn't give an inch or someone would cut in front of you, which was completely unacceptable. So that was kind of a theme for her entire life, was she always did things young, did things early. She was actually the youngest, when they'd moved then to DC, she was the youngest person in her high school class. It graduated at a young age, and her high school closed when she graduated. That was the last graduating class. So she used to like to say that she, to this day, was still the youngest person who's ever graduated from her high school in DC. And she then went to college, as we know, at the University of Illinois, where she met my father and graduated at a young age from college. And then she married my father when she was just 21 years old as a college graduate. And she knew at that time that she wanted to have a very stable, happy family life, because growing up it was somewhat tumultuous, and she knew what she wanted for her family, and she made the right choice, I think, with my dad. Now, some of the things that came along when she was Secretary of State, there were different events happening, not just in the state, but I was living in Los Angeles at the time, and she got invited to some, as someone mentioned, to some high-end events. I think it was Patty who said that. Like one time when I was in LA, she got invited to this Hollywood party in the Hollywood Hills at a very elegant estate that was overlooking the entire LA basin, and there was 70, 80 people there, and there were some big-time Hollywood and political people there, and I was having a great time. They had good food and good champagne, and I was doing my thing, she was doing her thing. And I noticed my mom was talking to Paul Michael Glaser. And those of you who, let's say, are under 45 years old may not know who that is. That's Starsky from Starsky and Hutch. And my mom didn't watch a lot of TV, and I was like, I wouldn't think that she would know Starsky, but okay, she's talking to him. And, I was still going around talking and to other people, looking around and having fun. And I noticed she kept talking to them. They were going back and forth, and this went on for 15, 20 minutes. I'm like, I gotta get over there, find out what the heck are they talking about. So I go over there, and my mom says, "Oh, Harry, this is Paul." And I said, "Paul, nice to meet you." And she said, "By the way, Paul, what is it that you do for a living?" And he said, "Well, I'm an actor and a director." And she said, "Well, I understand that's a very difficult business to break into. I wish you all the best." I said, "Mom, I think he's doing okay." I said, I know how you are, but that was, they were talking about all sorts of other things, and that was, it just hadn't come up apparently. And he was very happy apparently talking to her because everyone else who talks to him wanted to talk about Starsky and Hutch. But of course it wasn't always famous people she was talking to, and I know Terry knows this story, that one time, I think it was in Oskaloosa, she was riding in some 4th of July parade in a convertible, and when this parade was over, she was approached by a gentleman wearing a chicken suit, a chicken costume. And apparently he was very upset at her about some policy she had or some vote she did or something. And he proceeded to get in her face and yell at her for 5 or 10 minutes in his chicken suit. And he was waving his hand or wing or chicken lip or whatever it is you call at her. And she just maintained her composure and, had a little discussion with the man in the chicken suit. So I thought that was kind of interesting. So, and as people, I want to get back to Burlington because people have mentioned her love of the people, the homes, and heritage of Burlington. And we all had our lives, as John mentioned, and she was very dedicated to the family. But we had our lives, they had theirs, and we were involved, at least I was involved in sports all the time, individual and team sports. I see a couple friends here, Scott Zeisler and Craig Smith. We were on a lot of teams and played a lot of different sports together growing up. And this was a few years back. I was watching something on TV with her, and I saw something that there was some athlete who had just won a championship, and he said, this is all for my parents. He said, I had my parents always came to practice and watched me, always came to my matches and watched me, and they were always there for me, and I just really drew off their energy a lot. I said, Mom, I did all this stuff, from ages 5 to 17. I never remember you once coming to any match. And she said, well, you never wanted us to come. I'm like, oh, okay, well, it's probably true. I just don't remember that part of the story. But there were a lot of things that she was always there for. She always sent us cards for our birthdays, for Easter, for Valentine's Day, for every single holiday. So we always got a card in the mail. And for our birthdays, I know John's birthday, I know Kate's birthday, but every single year, is this right? She'd call 2 or 3 days before, remember it's your sister's birthday on Friday. Well, I know when my sister's birthday is. Remember when my brother's birthday is. But one other thing that she always did all the way into adulthood was she always sent me a chocolate Easter bunny for Christmas, for Easter. I always got a chocolate Easter bunny in the mail. And this, as I said, continued all the way into adulthood. And this year, she passed away 9 days before Easter. So there was no Easter bunny, chocolate Easter bunny for me this year. So Easter came and it was difficult for me, and I went to the store on Easter Sunday. I got myself a chocolate Easter bunny. But anyway, I just don't think that you're ever old enough to lose a parent. I care how young you are or how old you are. You're never enough of a grown-up to lose a parent. It's always difficult. And I just want to finish by, I wanted to tell the same story that I told in my father's service, because my parents, as everyone's mentioned, they were a team. And they were married for 58 years. And I've lived in South Florida in Miami Beach for 16, 17 years now. And they used to always like coming and spending a month or two with me, or not with me, but renting an apartment in Miami in the winter, which for obvious reasons, for the weather, not to see me. but no, we spent a lot of time together. And anyway, one time we went out shopping. Department store, a huge store. And my mom was doing her thing, looking at stuff. My dad was looking at stuff. And my mom went through all these racks of men's shirts and grabbed a shirt. And she said, "I'm going to get this for your father." And I said, "Well, that's nice, but why don't you let him pick out a shirt?" She said, "Okay." So she put it back, and I went and I got my dad. My dad comes over, and spends 10, 15 minutes going through all these hundreds of shirts on all these racks. And he picks out the same shirt that my mom had selected. I'm like, okay, well, they know each other very well, and that's what happens after 58 years. So anyway, once again, thank you all for being here. It's very special. So, Kate?
Thank you. I'm Kate, Elaine and Harry's oldest child, and there's something really special about coming to Burlington and being able to introduce myself as the daughter of Harry and Elaine Baxter, and I love that. Thank you, Harry and John, for thanking everybody for us, and I also wanted to recognize the First Methodist Church for opening their doors to us and supporting us in the audiovisual department, so thank you for that. And I want to recognize a really special group of people, some of whom are here today. These are Mom's caregivers, and they're seated behind Brian and Jane in the fourth row back. I want to thank them for all they did for Mom and our family. They gave her tremendous care and support as her Parkinson's was progressing, and they also helped her achieve her goals, which were staying independent in her own home, staying connected to the people and activities that mattered to her, and staying connected to exercise programs. So we can never thank you enough for all you did for her. And you've heard a lot today about challenges she faced, and in many ways, I think her last and perhaps her biggest challenge was living with Parkinson's disease. She was diagnosed at age 22, and like everything else she did in life, she made it her mission to learn all she could about the disease and how to live the best possible quality of life while she managed the symptoms. And she didn't let Parkinson's define her, but she did get very involved in the Parkinson's community. She participated in the support group here in Burlington. She got an exercise program started at Great River Fitness, which continues on to this day. And she got involved with regional and national Parkinson's organizations. She shared the information she learned with others, and she advocated for living a full life with Parkinson's. Over the past few months, I've been reflecting on gifts that she gave me that I failed to recognize at the time. When I was growing up, I didn't understand why our dining room seemed to always be full of political materials. We had yard signs and bumper stickers and brochures, some of which were for John Culver, all over the place, and there were always people in there working on these campaigns. And then when I was around 14 or 15, I didn't understand why she wanted to run for city council. And then particularly didn't understand why my senior year in high school she would run for mayor. She put herself out there in a way that was foreign to me and that I didn't understand. And I couldn't comprehend why she would want everyone to know who she was and have opinions about her and possibly write letters to the editor. And why it wasn't just enough to be our mom, quite frankly. I mean, at that point in our life, that struck me as a weird thing. And I also couldn't understand why she didn't bake cookies more often. That was important to me, so, why wasn't it important to her? I also didn't understand why she pushed me out of my comfort zone to look at colleges in different parts of the country where I didn't know anyone and possibly wouldn't have much common ground with other students. And it's only in hindsight that I can appreciate that she was showing me and us that it's good to get involved and it's good to work hard to make a difference, work for things you believe in, sometimes challenge the status quo, don't always take the path of least resistance, learn to travel and meet people from different backgrounds, and learn to launch yourself in a different world. And sometimes that can bring great rewards. And I've learned to appreciate both the experiences of growing up in a small town where people knew our family, and to finding community in a large city, and both of those I value very much. Possibly the biggest gift we had was having parents who stayed in our hometown, in the home we grew up in, surrounded by families who'd been in their homes since before the Baxters arrived in 1966, and we're so blessed to have many of those families still in our neighborhood in the next generation in those homes, so that no matter where we were living or what was happening in our lives, we always had a home to come back to, where people knew us, where our family had roots and stability, and we got to continue to make new memories in Burlington with all of you, which has just been the greatest gift I think that any of us have. And so thank you all for being here today. Thank you for supporting our mom and our family all these years. It really means a lot to us. And now I want to turn the program over to a very special person, Shirley Lewis, who was one of Mom's caregivers. We loved getting to know Shirley. What we didn't know until recently is that Shirley's also a faith leader. And so we asked her to close us out in prayer. So come on up, Shirley.
As she said, my name is Shirley Lewis, and I want to thank you, family, for the honor to share at the celebration of Elaine Baxter. It was really such a joy to be part of caring for her. We really had some good and challenging times, you know. And I do want to say a big hello and thank you to Nola. Nola was the one heading up the team, and one of the things that they referred to as the team, one of the things that Elaine referred to us as was those are Nola and her church ladies. So Nola, would you stand? I just want to give Nola a hand. Would you help me thank her? I want you to know that Nola continued to remind us about our assignment with Elaine. She continued to let us know that we are here to give her the best care that we can. So we thank Nola for that. And her husband, Kyle, oh my goodness, he would have them sidewalks cleaned up because I hate ice. Right, John?
Yes, that's right, Shirley.
Did not like ice, and when John was there also, he would get it cleaned off, but Kyle would make sure that the ice was off of the sidewalk. So thank you, Kyle, for that. I appreciate that. Elaine was also known as baby girl to me. And, you know, there were times when they would send things home for her to do, like, you know, continue with your exercises, you know, like homework assignments, you know. And, you know, there were times when Elaine, you know, she ain't feeling it. She didn't want to do that, you know. And so when I would use Nola, now, you know, use Nola's name, I would use Kate's name, I would use the doctor name to try to get her to, you know, act right, you know. But the one thing that I would say to her, I would say, now, baby girl, and baby girl would just melt. She would just smile all over the place. And so I started using it. I realized I was an ace girl. I was an ace card, so I would play that all the time. And she just melted and just smiled all over the place, you know. And as we know, Elaine was a woman of great accomplishments. You've heard that today. And, you know, Elaine and I would sit at the table many a time. She loved looking at her photo albums, just loved it. And she would talk about her kids, and she would say this, show the same pictures over and over, tell the same stories over and over, But she enjoyed telling about her family. And I want y'all to know, she loved her kids. Now, Elaine loved to eat, but let me tell you something. And she didn't want you interfering when it was time for her to eat. But if that phone would ring and she thought it was one of her kids, the food could go cold or anything else, because she was so excited to hear from her kids. Isn't that beautiful? She loved them. I remember one time sitting at the table with her, and over a period of time, Elaine knew that I was a pastor. And so this one particular time, I was sitting at the table with her, and she started just out of the blue talking to me about how that she was raised up in the Catholic church, So she had questions for me, because she said, I'm going to check this girl out, So she had questions for me. So she asked the questions, so I tried to answer them the best that I could, And so on down through the conversation, she says to me, Shirley, I don't have the connection that you do with the Lord. This was about a month before she passed away. And so I began to share with her how I found that connection to God through Jesus Christ. Shared a little bit with her about that. And I said, Elaine, would you like to pray with me to receive that connection to your Heavenly Father? Without hesitation, she said, yes. Prayed with her. She received Jesus Christ as her Lord and Savior. So I wanted you to know that in all of her great accomplishments, and we know there were many, I want you to know that about a month at the end of her life, I had the awesome privilege as a pastor, as a minister of the gospel, to share Jesus with her. And she was totally open, totally receptive. So I want you to know that. And so I want to say to you, if you feel like you have a disconnect, do what Elaine did. Elaine was a trailblazer. Elaine she set great examples. So I want to encourage you to do the same thing that Elaine did. She prayed a simple prayer. I led her in the prayer, Heavenly Father, forgive me of all of my sins. I ask Jesus Christ to come to be Lord of my life. Very simple prayer is all we prayed. So I want to encourage you, if that's something that you would like to do, take time out to do that, to make that connection. I want to leave you with the blessing of the Lord. So if you would stand, I'm going to release the blessing of the Lord over you. This is in Numbers chapter 6, verse 24. And it says, the Lord bless you and keep you. The Lord make his face shine upon you and be gracious unto you. The Lord lift up his countenance upon you and give you peace. So be blessed, and thank you so much.